I'm December the 4th, remember that day.
Okay. The ancestors send their blessings to you. Today, we're here to address the omissions by the Pope on his visit to America. In COBRA, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, would like to thank everyone for coming out this evening. We're here to address the omissions from the Pope's messages during his visit to the U.S. in relationship to people of African descent. In addition, we are calling on all people of African descent with a special invitation to Black Catholics and the Catholic community in general to stand with us. Our efforts here are to begin a conversation, to begin dialogue with aims of righting historical wrongs committed by the Roman Catholic Church against African people and people of African descent. Wrongs that continue to negatively impact us globally on a daily basis. We're here not to cast aspersions, confront or attack the Catholic Church, Pope Francis, or the Catholic community in the U.S. or Chicago, Black, white, Hispanic, or other. We're here to tell the truth and again call for action that would assist in the repair of African peoplehood globally. Let us begin by indicating that we are pleased that Pope Francis invoked the memory and spirit of our great ancestor, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., during one of his addresses. And I quote Pope Francis, "To use a telling phrase of the Reverend Martin Luther King, we can say that we have defaulted on a promissory note, and now it's time to honor it." In invoking Dr. King's spirit with this particular statement, Pope Francis has opened the door to the discussion of reparations. As we know, Dr. King made this statement in the context of calling for reparations in America. Since this door was cracked by Pope Francis, we would like to open it fully so we can explore the depth of the Church's role in the injury of African people and the fullness of its obligation to join in our repair. First, the injury. The historical record will affirm that the Roman Catholic Church, number one, ordered the destruction of African nations, the genocide of native nations, and the enslavement of Africans and people of African descent. Beginning in 1411 and 1430, Pope Martin V issued two papal bulls said to have created and established the international slave trade, ordering the Portuguese to go into Africa, ignoring all laws of sovereignty and divine rights, and invade, plunder, and reduce its inhabitants to perpetual slavery. His successor, Pope Eugene IV, ratified his orders and in 1438 extended to Spain the same mission in what would later become the Americas. In 1452, Pope Nicholas V wrote in a separate edict for Spain ordering and granting, and I quote, "free and ample faculty to invade, search out, expunge, vanish, and subdue all pagans and enemies of Christ whatsoever place, and their persons to reduce to perpetual slavery, and all of their kingdoms, possessions, and goods to apply and appropriate," unquote. In 1458, his successor, Pope Calixtus III, continued this grant to Spain and Portugal. Papal bulls of 1492 and 1493 authorized the monarchs to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue, and appropriate all goods whatsoever held and possessed by them, and reduce their persons to perpetual slavery. Finally, in 1537, Pope Paul III abolished the enslavement of indigenous peoples in America, denying the humanity of Africans and setting in motion the brutal enslavement of Africans and people of African descent that continued for more than 350 years after. Number two, the Roman Catholic Church inaugurated the racial hatred and racial structuring of the world that has Africans and African descendants on the bottom of humanity in the areas of recognition of the value of their humanity and the safety and respect of their persons and property. Prior to the orders of the church mentioned above, Africans and people of African descent were held in high esteem, and in many cases the highest place of esteem and respect globally among humanity. For instance, when the first Europeans entered Africa, Egypt, the Greek historian Herodotus, who described those inhabitants as having woolly hair and burnt skin, also described them as gods, and the Greeks as children in comparison. The Romans held the Ethiopians in high regards and enjoyed diplomatic relations as equals. In the East, we know that the first Chinese dynasty was founded by African descendants. Statuary all over the Orient shows that the Buddha himself was of African descent. And in Japan, it was commonly asserted that in order to be a true samurai, you had to have part African blood. Throughout the Eastern Europe, prior to the church's orders that I described, the Black Madonna and Child was venerated in nearly every cathedral for hundreds of years. Even in what is now called the Americas, Africans were held in high esteem, as the temples and colossal heads of the Olmecs, the first African civilization in America, attests. It was only after the church's official orders and the actions of those who received them that Africans began to suffer from the global abuse of denigration of our unique historical character. Number 3, the Roman Catholic Church has and is benefiting the most from these crimes against African humanity. To quote a few sites, the Catholic Church is the biggest financial power, wealth accumulator, and property owner in existence. She is a greater possessor of material riches than any other single institution, corporation, bank, giant trust, government, or state on the whole globe. And secondly, I quote, the church's wealth in the U.S. alone is greater than that of the 5 wealthiest giant corporations of the country. When to that is added all the real estate, property, and stocks and shares abroad, the staggering accumulation of the wealth of the Catholic Church becomes so formidable as to deny any rational assessment. Now to the church's obligations. With the church's history described above and its global position in the world, and at a time when black life is being extinguished in American epidemic numbers, it is of grave importance that Pope Francis specifically address this history and the need for America and American Catholics and their institutions to focus their attention and resources on these conditions of African descendants. Therefore, we are calling all religious and spiritual peoples to stand with us as we call upon Pope Francis and the Roman Catholic Church to 1, offer an official apology to those actions by the Church that has led to the continued devastation of African life and limitation of their life chances here in America and globally. 2, full recognition by the Catholic Church of its role it has played in shaping a global racial consciousness that discriminates against, that marginalizes, and oppresses African people and people of African descent 24/7, 365, no matter where we exist on the planet. 3, immediate and full use of its global resources to assist reparatory justice organs in reversing this anti-African global racial consciousness and its effects. And 4, immediate and full use of its geopolitical influence in calling on America and all Western countries to move swiftly and without reserve in acknowledging, observing, and fulfilling the mission of the International Decade of People of African Descent 2015 to 2024 as declared by the United Nations. And COBRA thanks all who have came out today and urge you all to contact the Archdiocese in Chicago to share your views on this important issue of reparatory justice and demand a continuation of this conversation that Pope Francis has begun.
Can you speak to how they're writing out?
We have called, and we're going to introduce Mama D, and who's going to let her speak. My name is Cam Howard. I am the Midwest Regional Chair of the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America and the Chicago Chapter Co-Chair.
Hi.
Before you speak, Mama D, he asked me to speak to the whiting out of the media in America. The media would pick up nothing in relationship to the injuries and crimes that they committed against people of African descent when we rise up to demand for justice. As our posters say, there would be no crime. If there were no crimes against our humanity, there would be no crimes in our streets. In London, just 3 months ago, 20,000 Africans met and marched on the Government House in London to demand reparations, and no media outlet in America picked that up. 20,000 Africans and people of African descent. We understand that the media's lack of presence here is part of the global continuation of crimes against African humanity, and we are not standing for it, and that's why we're using our own media sources to make sure this gets out to our young brothers and sisters, and they can join in this struggle for repair. And COBRA called this gathering, but this gathering we consider ourselves reparations enforcers. And reparations enforcers, any individual, any corporation, any institution, any government, any organization that understands that reparations for people of African descent is a human right, as declared by the 2001 Durban Declaration and Program of Action, which said slavery, the slave trade, colonialism, and apartheid were crimes against humanity. There is not an international entity that is designed to enforce that declaration, so we have to do it. Progressive elected officials have to do it. Progressive organizations, progressive governments, progressive institutions, progressive corporations have to enforce that declaration to ensure that African people are repaired from this injury. Those entities that have injured African people are criminals in relationship to African people, whether it's a Chase Bank or a Roman Catholic Church, and we're giving them the opportunity to amend for those crimes and assist in the healing of our people. Finally, we say that reparations is not about the past. It's not so much about the present. It's about the future of African people on the planet, and also the future of humanity. Because as African goes, there goes humanity. And so we struggle for the future of a just and righteous planet, and for African people to be whole and have a position of leadership in the planet's future going forward.